Umlen and Ablat Kamara. We are up to Daf Chof Amad Aleph and Masechta Chagigah, and we were learning the different grades of kedusha that there are. And the last discussion we had was if chulin shenaso ataras hakodesh, or people were so diligent and so meticulous that they would eat ordinary food and treat it as if it was kodesh, eat it in the same manner of them, to protect it and guard it the same manner as if you would do with something with kachim. And what status does that have? We actually have three opinions. We had a brisa, either it's just chulin, but tar, or better yet, it's like truma. Or in our Mishnah, we inferred from our Mishnah that it's actually on the same level as kachim. And the only thing that you have to be, that's I guess superior to that or exceeds that, is mei chafas, which is the water you make the korban chatas. There you have to be even more particular. Okay, so now we learn a couple of dinim or three dinim regarding what we just said right now, regarding monitoring and minding your whatever your belongings are to make sure that they're in the standard of tahara. Din number one. Where are we? Sorry. Amar Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, about 15 lines on the top, not even, about 12 lines on the top of the page. Rabbi Yonasan said, the son of Elazar said, Nofla ma'afar tehimenu. What happens if your towel fell down, let's say your handkerchief or something, fell down on the ground? Amar lechaveri, you turned to your friend who was standing right there, and you said to him, Tanoli, do me a favor, pass me my handkerchief. And he gave it to you. Tmeya, it is tamei. Even though the person who picked it up might have been tired, it is tamei. And why is that? The Gemara will explain later. The reason why that is because the person picking it up thinking to himself, this guy who lost the handkerchief never asked me, am I tired? I'm not tired. I mean, he doesn't really care, which means he himself is not tired. Well, if he doesn't care, I'm not going to mind it. Even though it's only a couple of minutes, I'm not going to be careful. So therefore, since it was neglected, this handkerchief, and nobody minded it to make sure that it stays in the standard of kedusha, even though, as far as we know, nothing happened to it, it's no longer considered minded, and it's no longer considered, tahor, so it's considered tamei.
Which line are we on?
Sorry?
Which line are we on?
Oh, we are up to the first word line is Amar Rabbi Yonasan and Amram. It's about 15 lines on the top of the page. Chof Amid Aleph. So we just learned a din. If somebody drops anything, a towel, a handkerchief, somebody else picks it up and you ask him a favor to give it to you. So you didn't ask him, are you tired? So that person who picked it up assumes that he doesn't care if I'm tired or not. So he doesn't mind it anymore. So then, when he gives him back that handkerchief is considered tamei for those who are machmir, and they want to make sure that everything that they touch is tar. This handkerchief can no longer be considered tar because it was neglected for a short time. Din number two. Amar Rabbi Yonasan ben Amram. Rabbi Yonasan ben Amram said, what happens in this chalful kelim shel Shabbos bekelim shel chol? You're looking for a weekday shirt, and by mistake you took a Shabbos shirt. Now on Shabbos you're on a higher level of more kedusha, more than during the week, and more tara. So therefore, if by mistake you took a Shabbos shirt and you thought it was a weekday shirt, so all you gave it was the monitoring of a weekday. The love, you put it on, nitmu, it becomes tamei. In other words, right now we're thinking the reason is because if you thought it's A, turned out to be B, it's as if you minded the wrong thing, and it's not considered minded. And tomorrow we'll have a discussion on that. Din number three. Amar Rabbi Elazar Tzaddik. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Tzaddik, said, Maaseh, there's a story, b'shtei noshim. There's a story, two women, chaveres, friends, shenischalfu lehen kileim, basically they both went to take a bath, and by mistake they swapped their clothes. And even though they were both tahor, right? Because they're both chaveros, they're both the wife of a Talmid Chacham, they're both very particular, but they were each one wearing the other person's clothing. The question they wanted to know is the ball of Vaisa from Akiva wanted to know what's the story, because even they continued minding the clothes, but it wasn't theirs, it was somebody else's. With Timon and Akiva said it is tamei. Again, we're going to think right now the problem is because I'm minding something which is not what I thought it was. Says the Gemara, I don't understand it. That's pshat. That if you minded something, you thought of something else. It's not considered minding. So Maskul Rabbi Shabbos has a question. According to this, what happens if Hoishit Yodeh L'Sal? You stretch your hand out into your basket, which is on your shoulder, Lito Pas Chitin, or whatever. You put your hand in the basket to take a wheat bread, but also B'Yodeh Pas Oilim, and instead you picked up a piece of barley bread. According to your logic, since it's not what I intended, even though I was careful and I'm tired, you're telling me it's not considered monitoring. Yeah, that's what you're saying. That's the only thing I can conclude. Says, what's the problem? You're right. Taka isn't minding, and that barley bread now is considered tummy for somebody who was very particular in taras and all that. That it's considered hesachadas. Hesachadas means you removed it from your mind. Since it's the wrong thing, it's as if you're moving your mind. If that's the case, let me ask a question. Tanya, you were guarding a barrel. You assumed it was wine. You were making sure that nothing tamei came close to it. And turned out to be it was actually oil. So yet you minded the wrong thing. Says this brayso to hoida milatame. It is tar and it does not generate any tumah to anything else. What do you see clear from here? As long as I mind it, doesn't matter what you thought it was. The fact is you made sure that it didn't become tameh. It's good enough. And so how do you explain the last two cases about these two women change your clothes, or you thought it was weekday shirt, you ended up taking a Shabbos shirt? What's the difference? You mind it the whole time. Says the Gemara, so what are you trying to say? Gemara against counters. So what are you trying to say? That if you had the wrong thing in mind, it's still all right. So let me ask a question. The time I'm going to you, aim a safer, read the next part of the brayso. Even though that this barrel does not make anything else tamei, but you're not allowed to eat the contents of this barrel. Now, why not? You minded it. So what do you thought it was wine turned out to be oil? But according to you, if you minded it, made sure it remained tar, it's good enough. It's not called hesachadas, that you were distracted or neglected it. Amai, why can't you eat it? According to you, it's still tar. Amar Rabbi said, no. Really, it doesn't matter if you mind it for one thing and for something else, it's still good enough. As long as you minded it properly, it doesn't matter what you thought it was. The fact is you made sure it didn't become tummy. So what's the story here? Why you thought it was wine and turned out to be oil? You cannot eat the contents. So we have an interesting case. We learned before that there's a thing called puzzle and a thing called tummy. Puzzle is if it's the end of the line. And tummy is that it's not the end of the line. It can continue to generate tummy. So for example, a rishon is called tummy. Why is it tameh? Because if it comes in contact with food, it makes it into a sheni. So it has a power. Not only eat itself is tameh, but it can also disseminate that tumah. But a sheni by chulin is called pasul because it can't go any further. It's tameh. You cannot eat it, but it's no longer able to generate tumah or disseminate tumah. And therefore, we say what? That it is pasul. So this person here said, "I'm going to mind it." That we're talking about an interesting case and why the barrel, the content you cannot eat. Because you said all I'm going to make sure is it doesn't come in contact with anything that's going to make the barrel tummy, which means it can pass the tumor on to something else. But if it comes in contact with something that will make the barrel tummy puzzle, that means it's the end of the line. Let's say it's a sheni. It'll come in contact with a rishon, so the barrel becomes a sheni, and it can't go any further. In chulin, that's called puzzle. That I'm not so worried about. I don't really care so much about the barrel. I'm more concerned about if the barrel comes in contact with anything else. That's why. That's the case we're talking about. So that's why the oil that's in the barrel you cannot eat because it's tummy if you're careful about tum tara. But we're not worried that it can pass tum on to anything else because that you were mindful and you made very sure it didn't happen. Says the Gemara. It's talking about shmartia. I made sure that not come in contact with something that will make it tummy, so that it can continue passing on the tumah. It didn't mind if it touched something that made it itself tummy or it puzzle, but it cannot go any further. That's why, since I didn't mind it as far as that's concerned, I cannot eat the contents of the barrel. Who knows? Maybe it did come touch something that made it puzzle, but I definitely, if the barrel now touches anything else, I have no worries so another comes out from here. There's like sort of a halfway minding. So there's such a thing. Where you combine something halfway, I'm going to make sure that it doesn't become tummy on a higher level. But I don't care I'm not going to watch it if it becomes tummy on a lower level. Either you're watching, you don't watch it. Maybe just halfway. Say what in? Yes, you could mind something properly, and I'll prove it to you. So Tanya, we learned. Let's say you stretch your hand onto the basket. The basket is on your shoulders. You're not really seeing what's inside, observing what's inside. Just place your hand in there. Now, you have inside the sal like this fork, which you use to separate the figs. Used to separate figs. Let's say it's also used as a rake to move coal about in your oven. So this, if you have all these figs inside your barrel, and then you have this fork there as well, and you're moving your hand around, and you're trying to and you're minding the basket to make sure that it's toy. But you weren't thinking about that particular fork to make sure that stays toy as well. Hasal toy. So since you minded the basket is toy. The hamagifit may. But since you did not mind that particular fork, that separator, therefore, if somebody is machmir and they're very worried about their taras, they cannot. It's considered tummy. Now that's what they give him. So what does he clear them here? That you can mind part of it, and part of it you're not minding, and it can be done. And I don't understand. I don't understand. Hasal toy. What do you mean the basket is toy? If you're telling me that that fork has a din of tumah, then the fork who's touching the basket and touching everything in the basket should be metami all that beside the fork. What do you mean the basket? How can the basket remain toy and the fork be tummy? Doesn't make sense. Says the Gemara, hasal toy. Titma hamagrif l'sal. Why doesn't this fork can generate tumah around the basket? Says the Gemara, why? You want the basket to become tummy? Ain keli matame keli. The rule is a keli does not have the capacity to matame another keli. A keli that touches an ava tumah becomes a rishon. A rishon can only pass on tumah to food and drink, not to another keli. So therefore, this magrifa, this fork touches the basket, doesn't matter. So okay, that's okay. You gave a good answer regarding the basket. What about the food inside the basket? The magrifa is touching the food. Let all that food become tummy. How can you say that the basket and all its contents are torah except for that fork? Well, the tummy mashet besal. Why doesn't it make tummy everything that's inside the basket? Amar Avinu says. So it's talking about exactly what we said before. But Oime, you said, Shemartiv midover shemitame. I'm going to make sure that nothing comes in contact with anything in this basket, even the fork, from something that's going to make that this basket is tame, so it has a capacity, it becomes a rishon, so that it can mitame other food. That I'll be careful. But I'm not going to mind. I'm not going to be careful to make sure that it doesn't come in contact with a sheni, let's say with a rishon l'tumah, which makes all the food inside the basket a sheni l'tumah, but he cannot pass it on any further. So that I'm not going to. So here we see clearly, because that's why the basket and everything else. When we say Torah, it means Torah from being mitame others, but or even this magrifa. You were careful that this magrifa did not become, it might have become tummy that it can only reach a certain level, but it can't go any further than that. In other words, the magrifa touched an avad tummy, it becomes a rishon. It cannot make another keli tummy. So, and therefore, here we see you can separate. I can make sure that it doesn't become tummy enough to mitame others, but it itself can become tummy. Trace really asks, he doesn't understand. It's impossible. Because the magrifa is a keli. The only way a keli can become tummy is if it touches a avatum. So the keli, so this magrifa now is a rishon. If a rishon touches food, it becomes tummy. How is it possible for the magrifa to only become pasul but not tummy? Pasul means it's a sheni, but a keli cannot become a sheni. A keli becomes a rishon. If a keli touches a rishon, nothing happens. Only way a keli becomes tummy is if it touches an av. If a keli touches an av, the keli is a rishon. If the keli is a rishon, then it's able to, if it comes in contact with food, that food becomes a sheni, the second generation. So what does it mean? What's going to saying here that talking about the magrifa that you had in mind that it become possible, not tummy? How's it possible? And Taisus then adds, the only way it's possible is there's a concept called, we had in the end of the Gemara, the first paragraph, mashkin. We made a special decree that mashkin, liquids, that even if it's a sheni, becomes like a rishon, and a mashkin also contaminates a keli. And why is that? Because there is mashkin, the saliva of a zov, that is considered an avatumah. So we wanted people to be very careful with liquids. So therefore, we made it as a rule that the mashkin becomes a tchila, number one, that even though it comes in contact with a lower level, it becomes a tchila, becomes a rishon, and it has a capacity in time of keli. So that's what happened here. The mashkin touched the magrifa, so the magrifa only becomes possible. It cannot continue without tumah. Anyway, what does it mean? You can have a partial protection. So you want to recall kasha. I still have a problem about the food. Why it doesn't become tummy? Furthermore, okay, I understand that the magrifa cannot be metami other keli, but what about the food inside? It's not a problem. We don't have an answer. Another question that you're telling me that you cannot, if you have one thing, if you thought it was something else, and you cannot be metami, that's a question. Sorry, then it's like instead of minding, And you're telling me in the case where the barrel of wine was, it is considered minding, is because you did have in mind everything, but all you had in mind was that it should become tamei. You didn't have in mind that it should become possible. Well, that's a question of another case. The woman beged ze arakti betara. This particular beged, this particular clothes, I weaved and I was tired. And but I wasn't minding it the whole time. I know for a fact that as soon as the material reached the size of 3 fingers by 3 fingers, which is considered a dove chashav, that now it's receptive to become tameh, I made sure that I wasn't a nid and everything else, and I didn't touch any tameh. But I wasn't really watching it. So right. So what's the big deal? What could have gone wrong? She was tired, and that's it. Says the Gemara. Started asking her, interrogating her, asking all kinds of questions. She mentioned that Rebbe nida moshcha imi bechevel. I did have a friend who helped me with the string, with the machine, with the loom, to move it back and forth. And could be some material was what do you call it? It was attached to the loom at the time, and therefore maybe she moved it then, and the din is it becomes tamei. So in other words, even though she was tired, minding it is a step that's very important to make sure that it remains tired, because there are things that happen you don't even realize. You thought that your tired is good enough. She suddenly remembered she had a friend helping her pull a rope to the machine, and she didn't even put 2 and 2 together. I want to be how wonderful the words of Chamim. I mean, it said, only if you continued to be meticulous and watch it is tired. If you didn't continue watching it, it is tamei. We had the Gemara in Shabbos. These are beautiful days where Rabbi Shmuel there said, "Oh, well, I can read before candlelight in Shabbos, and what's the big deal? I'm not going to move the candle." And it turned out to be he forgot himself and he tilted the candle. And Rabbi Shmuel there said, "How wonderful are the words of the Chachamim! How wonderful the words of the Chachamim!" So we see Rabbi Shmuel had a habit to praising the Chachamim for adding gzeiros. It's not like he will go in there and said how wonderful the words of Chachamim that didn't give a reason, we just follow. Because here he gives a reason. In fact, it's the whole thing. He's explaining the reason of Chachamim. And he's saying here is because the Chachamim, when they add another layer, it's real. It's not something you say, it'll never happen. It can happen all the time. And that Mukts and all these other Rabbanas that came on these layers, they're there to protect us, safeguard the Torah. Another story, similar story. A woman, she said to Rebbe, "Mapazu araktia betara." This cloth over here, I took care of it. I made sure that I was tired. I wasn't minding it, but it should be all right because I was tired. And obviously, she was a chaver. She wanted to make sure that everything in her house is tired, so she wanted to know that's good enough. After interrogating her, she did say one thing. Nima nifsikali, yes, a thread actually, broke. And I then used my mouth to tie it back together. Before I wove it again, I used my mouth. And a thing like this. So she was a nida previously, and we are worried that when she made the material the right size, when she used the mouth to fix it up, there was some saliva. If some saliva remained behind, the saliva of a nida is an avatuma, and the saliva of a nida is avatuma, so therefore it becomes what do you call it? She's metame these threads. That's what Rashi wants to say. Again, look at the Chachamim. It's not good enough for you to you have to mind it. They said, in other words, when she wove it, she was tired. She was not a nida anymore. But when she prepared the threads, she was a nida. When she prepared, it was one thread that tore open, and she was a nida at the time, and some of the saliva went on it, and therefore, if the saliva is still there, her saliva is an avatuma. Now, at the time in this thread, it didn't bother us that she was a nida because threads are not the size of 3 fingers by 3 fingers, so they did not make kabel tuma. So, okay, even though she's a nida when she prepared the threads, no big deal. But she used her mouth to fix that thread, so saliva remained behind, possibly. There's a little bit of saliva, remember being very machmanal. A little saliva left on the thread, and then when she started weaving it and she made it the size of 3 fingers by 3 fingers, maybe some of the saliva was still there. And that's a problem. So Bishmol said, how right the Chachamim were. So justified. Says the Gemara. Let's go through the three cases that we had before. Bishleim makes sense. Rabbi Lazar Bat Tzaddik, we had two women chaveras that they each one by mistake took the other person's clothes. What's the problem there? The problem is when she realized that she's wearing someone else's clothes, she's saying to herself, well, then that woman's wearing my clothes. She's probably an amorit. There's very few people who are so machmer to be, like an Asia's chaver. So therefore, I stopped minding. I'm assuming that the clothes that I'm wearing, which is hers, are tummy anyway, or are not that level of kedusha. So therefore, she is no longer minding it. So that makes sense. Why? They're both considered now tummy. If somebody wants to be machmer al taras hakodesh and comes in contact with these clothes, you have a problem. Because each one says, Chaverosi, my friend, H is Amarit, is probably the wife of Amarit. She's no longer minding the clothes that she's wearing because it's not her, someone else, and she thinks it's not anyway to her to my liking. I understand that case. But Rabbi Yonis in the case of when the closet take out weekday clothes, ended up with Shabbos clothes. Now me also. Kivan the Kalim the Shabbos. Since Kalim the Shabbos because generally we are more careful with Shabbos clothes. She thinks that this weekday clothes, so you're not as careful as you do Shabbos. Fine. Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, the case of Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, which is that the handkerchief fell down on the ground, and he asked his friend to pick it up and bring it to him. What's the problem there? Why can't I watch it while it's in your hand? I'm standing there watching it, observing, and I'm making sure that doesn't come in contact with the sherets. I make sure that it's tired. Why isn't that good enough? What are you telling me that if another friend picked it up, it's not good? Rabbi Yechon said, we have a rule, you cannot mind what's in the hand of your friend. And because you cannot mind what's in the hand of your friend, therefore, your minding doesn't help. Says no, what do you mean you cannot mind the hand of a friend? But Tanya, didn't we learn how to? Now we have the same rule regarding yayin nesach. You have goyim moving your barrels about. So can you assume I didn't touch it or anything else? So Vatan we learned, and you're the boss. How to show you chamora of your freight couriers who lead the donkeys or your employees to unin taharis. Let's say they were taking wine in a barrel. They were carrying the barrels of wine in clay. Even though you are distant from them, they're not touching it. The idea of klei cheres is that even though they're touching the outside of the barrel, klei cheres does not become tamei from the outside. Metal, you touch the outside of the vessel, it becomes tamei. These, if you touch the outside by klei cheres, you touch the outside, it does not become tamei. And only from the aver, only inside. And they were, they weren't touching anything else. And the tahara is everything inside is still tahara. We're not worried that maybe they touched it inside. Why? Because even though he's distant more than a kilometer, because they don't know where he is, and they are, they make sure that they don't touch anything. So we see from here that even though you're the one who's watching it, and it's good enough. What do you tell me? You cannot watch what's in somebody else, observe somebody else's hand. You could. But if he tells them, go ahead, go on ahead. I'll come by soon. The moment he no longer physically sees it, then everything becomes tamei. Now, before we go any further, Maishna Reisha, Maishna say, what's the difference in the beginning or the end? Same thing. It's talking about really you cannot watch what's in somebody else's hand. And the reason, that's why in case number 2, so you cannot watch it, you're far away, you told you far away, it doesn't help. So why in case number 1 doesn't help? So he says, the reason is because you don't have to watch it. What is that? The first case is talking about where the people who are carrying it, you're transporting your barrels of wine, went to the mikveh and they themselves are 100% tired. So therefore, it's not I, the boss, is minding it. They themselves are the ones who are minding it because they're capable. So Sefer Nami, the Sefer also. So what about the Sefer? What do you call it? A person is talking about. So why in the safe is it a problem? If your people who are transporting the barrels of wine are tired, so even if I'm not around, who cares? They're tired. So where it says, if you're not around, they might invite their friends to come and take some wine or touch the wine because they don't understand, appreciate the value of the importance of it. They themselves are tired, but they don't mind of others. If you're observing it, it's one thing, but they we cannot totally rely on them because I don't care if somebody else comes along and touch it. If so, even in the Reisha. So even in the Reisha, when you didn't tell them clearly, I'm behind you, but you're not there, you're a mile away, you can't see what's happening. How do you know that they didn't invite Lamarit? Says the Gemara, talking about that you're not just a straight line behind them, you can pop up anywhere. You can come in front of them, you can come on the sides of them, they don't know. So they're very careful to make sure that they don't do anything wrong. They want to invite any friends to come over. Save also, go, I will come after you. So there, if he says, I will go and I'm coming later, they're relying that he's not around and they're not worried about it. So in the case of the ask the guy, that guy, the guy who's picking it up is not mindful at all because he didn't ask me to tell me a Torah, so he doesn't really care. And you cannot watch what's in someone else's hand. Hadin aloch ein dosh. Next Mishnah. Now we continue talking about kachim and truma. Chayme by kaidish and truma. There's a chumrah by kachim over truma. Now what? Number one, a number of chumras. Shemat bilin kalim b'ter kalim l'truma. When it comes to truma, there's nothing wrong. We put one keli inserted inside another. It's not really attached, so the water does creep in between. So it's not considered chatzitza, an interception. When it comes to kachim, we're more strict, and even though one keli is inside the other keli, we're more strict, and we don't allow that to happen. That's number one. Number two, acharayim. The back of a keli, if you turn it upside down, it sometimes has it's concave, so you can put things inside there. V'toich and inside the keli, ubeis hatzvita. By the handle, sometimes they have also a concave that you can put things inside. Is betruma. When it comes to truma, we say what each receptacle is considered like a separate keli, like you have 3 kelim there. And therefore, it comes to truma. Let's say if the bottom of the keli became tamei, it doesn't pass the truma onto anywhere else. It's like each one like a separate keli. Even if one part became tamei, the entire keli becomes tamei. We're talking about here tumas de rabbanon. The truma everything becomes tamei. Number 3, hanoi say as a midrash. If you carry, let's say, a shoe, which is something that a zav puts his pressure on, and we learned before that a zav, whatever he puts his pressure on, takes on the same level of tumah as a zav, an avatuma. Noise is a truma. Let's say he can carry an earthen barrel of truma because the tumah does not pass from the outside, and he does not place his hand or anything else on top of the wine, inside the avir of the barrel. But kachim, even that doesn't help us. We'll see more later because of a story that once happened. Number 4. Truma, those people who eat truma, who are very careful about truma and make sure everything is Torah, midas l'kodesh. As far as hegdish kachim is concerned, it's not good enough. It's a fact as if you are tamei, and like midas hakodesh, midas truma. Now, on the other hand, that by hegdish and truma, again, there's other rules that differentiate between hegdish and truma. Number 1, should be another one. Should be kodesh, a new list. By kodesh, when it comes to kachim, if let's say you have a bag, if you want to immerse something in the mikveh, you have to make sure there's no chatzitza, nothing intercepting. But there are also some kind of chatzitzas, not really chatzitzas, they look like chatzitzas, which is only a chumrah. So b'kodesh, when it comes to hegdish, you have a tamlik clothes, you have to open up all your nuts and all your everything that's tied together. Number 1, so you can allow water everywhere easily. Umenagiv, you have to make sure that it is dry, because if it is wet, it looks like there's something there and obstructing the water of the mikveh to get in behind the spittle. And then you put it in the mikveh. Afterwards, you tie it back up again. When it comes to truma, it doesn't matter. You can first make the knot, and then put it in the mikveh, as long as it's not very tight knot, so water can get in. Number 1. Number 2, kelim hanigmarim betaram. Kelim, as long as it's not yet completed, they're not makabel tumah. When is a kelim makabel tumah? Once it's the finished product. So if, let's say, that you finished the product and you made sure that it was toy, nevertheless, tzrichin tefillah l'kodesh. When you're about to use it for kachim, you have to tevel it again, even though you know that it was toy. But when did you mind it? From towards the end, when it was about to be completed, you have to go to mikveh again. Avaloi l'truma. Now when it comes to truma. Now, another difference, hakeli mitzadet masha b'toichai. Let's say you have a whole bunch of loaves of bread inside a baking pan, a bunch of biscuits inside the baking pan, and one of the biscuits become tamei. So do we then say that biscuit number 1, let's say, became a rishul tumah, touches biscuit number 2, biscuit number 2 becomes a shein tumah, touches biscuit number 3, nothing happens. By chulin, doesn't go any further. Or by truma, it becomes a shlisha tumah, then biscuit number 4, nothing happens. Or do we say that if you touch one biscuit, all the contents of that pan become tummy, just like this one biscuit, because it's treated like one big biscuit. So he says that when it comes to kachim, everything inside the keli is considered like one. Have a layla truma. Come to truma, each one is disparate. It's a disparate thing. Each one is independent from the next. And therefore, you touch one, that becomes tummy, and then it passes a little bit less truma to the next one, and so on. Okay. Next thing is Haravi, but Kodesh possible. Kodesh kachim, it goes up to a 4th generation, and that's the end of the line. That becomes possible. Shlishi betruma, and by truma, shlishi is possible because that's the end of the line. It can't go any further. Ubetruma by truma im nitmas achas miyava yadav. If let's say by a tumah, again, everything we're talking about in a tumah derabbanon, a tumah derabbanon we learned before only makes your hands tummy. All you have to do is wash your hands or immerse it in the mikveh. 40 on mikveh, but the rest of your body is tar. So let's say if one of your hands became tummy, there's no reason why the other hand should become. Let's say you touch the sefer, only that hand becomes tummy, not the other hand. But when it comes to hegdish, mat bilshtayil. When it comes to hegdish, your other hand becomes tummy as well. Shayad mitame es chavata b'kodesh. Your hand is mitame. The other hand, when it comes to kachim, avaloi b'truma. That becomes a truma. Oichlin neguvin b'yadayim misavav b'truma. Avaloi b'kodesh. When it comes to food, you can eat if your hands are dry. Right? If your hands are dry, and so we're talking like this. Oichlin neguvin. Let's say the food was dry. The food was. How do you prepare food that it should be a receptacle for tumah? It has to become wet, and we learned yesterday. And you have to be happy that it became wet. Let's say the food is dry and it was never prepared to mekabel tumah, and so now you want to eat it. Be a daim or so others. Your hands are always considered tummy. Remember we learned your daim shnia saying as far as truma, you have to wash your hands. So let's say with tummy your hands, you're allowed to eat betruma because since the bread is totally dry. Even though your hands are tamei, the bread does not mekabel tumah because it's totally dry. That's how Rashi learns. The Rambam is different. Avaloi b'kodesh, but not when it comes to kachim. When it comes to kachim, even though the kachim, let's say, is food that never was prepared for tumah, not mekabel tumah, and it's dry, nevertheless, you should not eat it with tumah the hand. When it comes to kachim, it's a step above. And the last thing is ha'oinen b'derabban. Somebody who was an oinen. Right, he didn't touch a dead body, but he was an einin for 24 hours until the body was buried, and during while he was an einin, he couldn't eat kachim. Or mechusik kipurim. These people were not able to eat kachim in their state, like an einin, who somebody close member of the family passed away. Mechusik kipurim, somebody who went through the 7 days already of Tara, went to the mikveh, the sun set, and the following day he has to bring kabbanas to enable him to start eating kachim. After he brought those kabbanas, he has to then go to mikveh again. They want to eat kachim, they have to go to the mikveh again after he brings his korban. And we'll see more later why. By truma, once you went to the mikveh and then the sun set, you can go ahead and eat truma. You don't have to go to the mikveh again. Tomorrow we will learn a bit of the Gemara on this.